The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Yesterday was President Donald Trump's first address to a joint session of Congress, not called traditionally a State of the Union when it is a new president giving such an address just 5 or 6 weeks after being inaugurated, but effectively that sort of speech. I'm going to go through this in 3 parts. I'll give you my general impressions. We'll talk about Donald Trump's policy ideas, and then I will talk to you about the accomplishments that Donald Trump attempted to take credit for during this speech. Number 1, Trump opening about Black history, civil rights, anti-Semitism. Obvious pandering in response to the criticisms that he's been on the receiving end of for the last several weeks, months, and years, but pretty smart, I would say, to get it on the record for the future. Also very noticeable, when Donald Trump decided that he was giving an applause line, you'd better clap because he was damn well not continuing until people applauded. Definitive applause lines, very clear during this speech. Weird reading, obviously. Trump is not the best person at reading. It's not tremendous. He's not bigly talented at reading. That we figured out. And he sort of couched the entire thing with this totally farcical setup about the bad situation that Trump inherited from Obama. And that was mostly riddled with lies. For example, Trump saying he inherited one of the worst financial recoveries in history or something like that. We have essentially full unemployment. We've got a stock market that more than doubled under President Obama. We have issues in the economy, of course, but just absolutely misleading to say that it's just a terrible economy that Trump inherited. Quite the opposite. Trump talking about 93 million not in the labor force. We've talked about that already. Trump also talking about how many manufacturing jobs we lost since the approval of NAFTA. He didn't mention that NAFTA was approved in 1993, meaning most of NAFTA has taken place not while President Obama was president, and manufacturing has been going away partially because of technology. That's going to keep happening, and partially also because people like Trump have exported jobs, including to Mexico and China. How many Republicans did you get the impression, Pat? I mean, we're just guessing, but a lot of those Republicans that were clapping, deep down, at least some of them have to think that this is just absolutely and utterly insane, and they're just going to go along with it as long as Trump's approval rating doesn't dip into the 20s. They're going to bail once it gets bad, aren't they?
Yeah, I could see that happening. It's always funny to see half the room applauding and the other half of the room staying seated. Yeah. But then you have some crossover, like Joe Manchin, one of the more moderate Democrats, you could say, to put it lightly.
Right.
He was standing up quite a bit.
Yep, I did see him clapping. And yes, I thought for a second, imagine Trump at 3 a.m. tweeting, "I did tremendously well. No matter what I said, at least half the room was clapping for me." He did not ultimately send that tweet, though. Lots of pandering. At one point, Trump pointed to a Black social worker who was an invited guest. He wants her to get a great job. Of course, he'll be cutting funding to the types of programs that would create the jobs that that young lady could potentially ultimately have. Trump talked about how great President Eisenhower was. Of course, Eisenhower at one point had a top marginal tax rate on the richest Americans of 91%. Not exactly what Donald Trump is talking about. And then for me, the most vile moment, the most cringeworthy moment was when Trump started pandering over the loss of that Navy SEAL in Yemen at that botched raid to Karen Owens, the widow of Ryan Owens. She was there, and it was some of the worst political pandering I've seen, touting the intelligence that was obtained, which turns out we really didn't get very much good intelligence from that. Trump has already attempted to pass the blame over that, the results of that raid, to the generals. Totally horrible move. We know that Trump couldn't even be bothered to be in the Situation Room for that raid. We know that Trump casually approved that raid over dinner with some of his advisors. And we also know that this was a raid that President Obama opted not to go on because he didn't believe that the potential rewards outweighed the risks. and painful to watch, not only because of the visible agony of Karen Owens, but also because of the just cringeworthy pandering.
I mean, I think it's clear that the Yemeni raid was a failure by any measure because 30 civilians perished. We all even lost one of our own, a Navy SEAL, and we didn't even get the top al-Qaeda operative that we were trying to get. So for Trump not even to be in the Situation Room when this unfolded, and then for him to try to pass the blame onto his generals and use these people who are the family members of victims as props, I mean, it was really just an example of pandering and really unfortunate if you think about it.
It makes absolutely no sense. It's vile. It was crassly manipulative, crassly manipulative. Okay, those are my general thoughts. Let's get into some of Trump's ideas, policy ideas, and the context of what he's talking about. Just a lot of alternative facts, which I like to call lies or distortions. Trump talking about the middle class has been shrinking as we've exported jobs. Trump's one of those job exporters. Absolutely no position to make that claim. Trump talking about the infrastructure spending that he's going to do. Okay, I actually agree with infrastructure spending, not in the crony capitalist way that Trump will do it, but since when do Republicans like the idea of spending $1 trillion on infrastructure? How are Republicans cheering now for that when they opposed President Obama wanting to do it and saying it was a disaster? In the midst of a disastrous recession when Obama took over, Republicans were voting no on infrastructure spending, which now they claim will be good for the economy. It's totally incoherent. Trump saying the drug epidemic will stop. Well, not with the war on drugs that Attorney General Jeff Sessions wants to revive. Constructing a wall, another policy idea from Trump, just stupid, right? I mean, it'll take longer to build than Donald Trump's first term. It'll cost over $20 billion. Many undocumented immigrants not actually crossing at the border. Trump claiming that most attackers since 9/11 came from outside the U.S. If you're talking about terrorism committed in the U.S., that's flatly untrue. I don't know what semantic game his speechwriters thought he could write there to make that even remotely true. Trump talking about new vetting procedures for immigrants and refugees. Previously, those vetting procedures that were described by the Trump administration were identical to what was being done under President Obama. So again, not really an idea. Trump's plan to demolish and destroy ISIS. I looked at that plan yesterday. It's the plan developed and started to be executed under President Obama, full stop, just not a Trump idea. Trump saying that companies are taxed at one of the highest rates in the world, so Trump wants to lower the tax rate. The tax rate on paper is irrelevant. The question is, what is the effective tax rate? And as we know, many huge corporations have major profits, but they pay a zero effective tax rate because of deductions and loopholes. Again, not really an idea, or I guess a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. He got to Obamacare, repeal and replace Obamacare. So what's going on with that? Obamacare provisions increasingly popular with Americans. Trump saying, well, the solution is to lower the cost so more people can afford it. But he doesn't want an individual mandate. How do you lower the cost if you don't cover everybody, which is what gets people in the emergency room for primary care, which makes insurance for people who do have it more expensive? Just incoherent.
Yeah, and we were promised to hear him unfold his plan for repealing and replacing Obamacare.
Yeah.
He spent half of that section just talking about how Obamacare is bad. We get that that's your point.
Yes.
Move on from that, get to the solutions that you have.
Yes.
And it was just typical Republican talking points, healthcare savings accounts.
Choice.
And crossing state lines, be able to purchase healthcare across state lines.
Yep.
It's more of the same.
It's more of the same, no real plan. And again, just the solution is lowering the cost. Wow. How insightful. He wants to support men and women of law enforcement. It sounds nice. It's not a policy proposal. It's just pandering. And then he touted the biggest defense spending increase in American history. It sounds patriotic. It sounds like it's going to be great for safety, national security. We spend an insane amount already on defense. We have 50 bases in Germany alone. There's absolutely no reason to increase defense spending, period. And then at the end, this had been sort of controversial because Trump had made some less than positive comments about NATO. Trump making it clear that he supports NATO. It's not clear he knows what it is, not clear he knows what it means to support NATO, but he supports NATO. And okay, that was one moment when Democrats clapped. Accomplishments that Trump tried to take credit for during his first address to a joint session of Congress. This is the best, okay? First, Trump touted all of those companies that announced that they're going to, quote, invest billions in the U.S., including Carrier and Ford. Most are bogus and not policy. Many of those decisions predate Trump being elected. Many of those decisions were not because of a great economic environment. It was because Trump called up companies and said, take money. Take money is not an economic policy. And a lot of those decisions also are going to lead to fewer jobs. The Carrier decision, for example, Carrier will be taking the money Trump's giving them and using it to automate their factory, which will over the long term destroy jobs. Trump taking credit for the stock market gains that have taken place since November 8th. Those were under President Obama, absolutely and totally bogus. Trump touting his hiring freeze on federal workers, which is insane. It costs money. It might sound good to Trumpists, but when you do a hiring freeze, you either pay overtime to the employees you have, which overtime is much more expensive than just hiring someone and having them work under 40 hours a week, or you bring in contractors, as I drop my Sharpie because I'm so agitated by this, you bring in contractors who charge more per hour than W-2 employees. Trump taking credit for draining the swamp, laughable. I mean, just completely untrue. Has anyone filled the swamp more than Trump, with everything from establishment consultants to Wall Street bankers that he slammed Hillary Clinton for being associated with? And for each new regulation, Trump wants to eliminate two. That's just idiocy. A haphazard recommendation like that is not really policy. It's idiocy. So taking credit for a lot of things that I'd be pretending I didn't do, and taking credit for lots of things that have nothing to do with him.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people are going to chalk this up as a success because he at least gave the appearance of someone who is presidential.
Yeah,
and he stuck to the teleprompter at least 99%. I mean, he would do some ad-libbing here and there, but honestly, you have to kind of think of it as one of his more finer moments when it comes to...
The bar was so low.
I mean, just people tuning in who may not watch these things unfold every day. If someone saw him be inaugurated and then wait a month to see him again, they would think that he's had so many successes thus far.
How much growth we've seen in Little Donald over the last 5 weeks. Trump said he's going to stop regulations that threaten coal miners. More jobs are being created in solar energy than coal energy. Coal is a joke. It's a dying industry. The world is laughing at us, and Trump is cheering that he's going to revitalize coal. He bragged about signing those meaningless orders saying he wants the Dakota Access Pipeline and Keystone XL to proceed. That is a recommendation. It's also not an accomplishment, and it's also embarrassing. The world is laughing at us about Trump wanting to build those pipelines. Also saying, and this was just funny, that the pipelines must be made with American steel. Number one, the steel that would be used for those pipelines has already been purchased, so Trump saying that now wouldn't change anything. But the real hypocrisy is Trump has built many of his own buildings with foreign steel. I mean, just a ludicrous hypocrite. Bragging that he got the U.S. out of TPP. Absolutely ridiculous. TPP was dead as far as U.S. involvement months before Trump was inaugurated. Had nothing to do with Trump whatsoever. Also, Trump wants to coordinate strategy to dismantle drug cartels. How about legalizing marijuana, which has been shown by a number of reports, it's been predicted would actually hurt cartels more than any of the nonsense that Trump is proposing. And then, of course, Trump bragging that he kept his promise and appointed a justice to the Supreme Court from the 20 justices that a right-wing think tank gave him. Not exactly something I'd be bragging about, but, you know, Trump did.
You have to fill up the hours somehow.
Yeah, exactly. So optics, you think we're positive here?
Absolutely, yes.
Substance?
No, it's never good with substance when it comes to Donald Trump.
I agree with you. Substance was absolutely insane. If you came in with embarrassingly low expectations that most people would have about this man, then maybe on optics, he conveyed some degree of strength. Pretty bad. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This is viewer and listener supported media, and today's new member of the day is Margaret Elizabeth Onodera. Margaret, thank you. Thank you so much for supporting the work we do. I will be revealing the record February that we had once we tally all the final numbers later this week, but I can tell you that we had over 500 new members during February, the shortest month of the year, more than doubling our prior single month record. And Margaret is one of those great people to quote Hannity. I'm not going to say great American because all nationalities are welcome to sign up for David Pakman Show members, but a great person, Margaret Elizabeth Onodera. Join Margaret at davidpakman.com/membership. And of course, the coupon code is available, davidpakman.com/membership. Coupon code I voted 17. And check out davidpakman.com/gear for all of the great stuff, including the coffee beans that are available. Hatriot Mail. Today, we are going to dig into Hatriot Mail.
If Ayn Rand and Ronald Reagan had a baby and suckled that child off the teat of liberty, its cries would sound a little something like Hatriot Mail.
Right.
Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
Mixed signals this week in Hatriot Mail. Let's take a listen together and see if we can make some sense out of it.
What a f***tard, Pajama Boy Pakman. TYT and Pakman are unhinged. Also, InfoWars have more credibility than the corporate media, and even more credible than this garbage channel. Pakman's smear job? Fail. You know how David Pakman can make America great again? Drop another shirtless photo on Instagram. Come on, David Pakman, you can make America great again. What % of your subscribers actually exist?
I can't tell if they hate me or if they're enamored with me, because they're both saying that everything I do is terrible, yet I could make America great again by putting another shirtless picture of myself up on Instagram.
I mean, they could hate you, but also be attracted to you. It's also interesting because maybe the first photo you put up made America good again, but not so far as to make it great again. But
yeah,
the next
who knows?
one will.
It's a blurry distinction between the two. And also, what do we have to do with TYT? Why are people writing to me about TYT? I don't know why. And then, the fake subscribers allegation. Oh, how many of your subscribers are actually real? Come on, it's weak stuff. You can turn Hatriot Mail into something positive if you use the coupon code Hatriot40 at davidpakman.com/membership. It will give you a huge, bigly tremendous discount off of membership. Hatriot40 is the code. We've talked about whether Donald Trump is a full-blown authoritarian. He's not really a conservative on many issues, but he's also not a liberal. It's sort of hard to pin down what Trump's beliefs are in some broader sense. I want to present to you a term that explains and describes the politics of Trump. This is really an important segment, okay? Regressive populism. Now, hold on a second. I'm not saying regressive as an ad hominem. This has nothing to do with regressive in the sense that it's sometimes used as an ad hominem in terms of regressive left. Regressive populism is a very specific term, and I've been reading a lot of sort of academic nonfiction related to politics and media for a new project I have, which I'll announce at some point soon. And I was reading a book called Waves of Rancor by Hilliard and Keith, and I came across a paragraph that described regressive populism. This book is nearly 20 years old. It describes Donald Trump. This paragraph was distinguishing a different sort of right-wing movement from the theocratic right, sometimes known as the religious right. There's an alternative called regressive populism. Let's take a look at it because it really explains what Trump is. Quote, Burlett and Quigley add to this theocratic right movement others as advocates of regressive populism, patriot, armed militia, and white supremacy groups. The overtly racist far-right organizations, such as the Ku Klux Klan, Christian Patriots, racist skinheads, neo-Nazis, and right-wing revolutionaries, promoting in various combinations and to varying degrees authoritarianism, xenophobia, conspiracy theories, nativism, racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, demagoguery, and scapegoating. We've talked about left-wing versus right-wing populism. This is much more nuanced, and it's a very relevant perspective, and it really explains what's going on right now and how it relates to the religious right, which this isn't. Trump is not the religious right. Trump talks about God to pander, and he did that in his address to that joint session of Congress yesterday. But it's overall a different type of appeal that Trump is making. And it's sometimes called just populist, but most reasonable people realize that it's not the same populism as in the message of Bernie Sanders was populism. It is regressive populism. It's populism based on conservatism or conserving. And sometimes it's more about not just conserving, but regressing to the past. And that's the opposite of progress. All populism will usually acknowledge economic insecurity. Bernie did that. Trump did that. But regressive populism proposes as solutions to that inequality varying degrees of regression. This might be finding scapegoats to blame for grievances, whether it's undocumented immigrants, welfare programs, dangerous Muslims, whatever. And the solutions proposed by regressive populism will further prop up the elites and grow the kleptocracy or oligarchy. Progressive populism, the populism of Bernie, is actually looking to hold elites and the wealthy accountable for their role in creating the problem and make them responsible for solutions. Regressive populism, that of Trump, actually wants to deflect attention away from the elites and the wealthy and big corporations and scapegoat others, usually to benefit the rich. And there's a really big overlap between the regressive populism of Trump and the calling cards of the radical right. This includes the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, the black separatists like the Nation of Islam. Most of those groups scapegoat a tyrannical government, Jews and minorities very, very often. Trump is doing that to varying degrees and with more subtlety. Note that none of this requires Trump or anyone to be personally racist or anti-Semitic. If he has racist or anti-Semitic people involved, fine. But I want to be super clear about that. This is an appeal to those ideas, and I think it explains so clearly what we're seeing right now.
So I think populism in a more general sense can often be a good thing because it means that you're listening to the will of the constituents, but it has to be kind of matched with this sort of consistency. So if you look at Bernie Sanders, he's been the same guy for 30 years in Congress. He doesn't really change based on the political wins. He doesn't change based on political expediency. But Donald Trump, I mean, he's changed so much in the past 10 years, especially. And I mean, if you look at this guy, he's kind of appealed to the worst in people, and that's how he goes about doing his populism. And I don't think that's the right way to go.
You're bringing up something interesting, which is a populist appeal does not necessarily mean that it is one that will be good for the majority of people. Populism can be appealing to the masses with particular messages, inclinations, or biases. And populism in and of itself, I think, is misunderstood in that it's objectively progressive. And here we are seeing very specifically regressive populism. Really, really interesting. I recommend the book Waves of Rancor from, I believe it's from 1999, Hilliard and Keith. It really will break down the different right-wing movements that exist, their use of media and messaging. And I just randomly came across this paragraph. I put it out on my Instagram page, david.pacman. And the more I thought about it, the more it clearly applies to what we're seeing under the Trump administration. Make sure that you join us on Reddit, where you can discuss this and any other stories that you're interested in. davidpacman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT.
The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com. Welcome back to the David Pacman Show.
We're continuing today with Dr. Stephan Guyenet, an obesity researcher and health writer whose work spans multiple fields of science to help explain and tackle the global weight problem. You can check out his website, wholehealthsouce.org. We stopped yesterday talking about sort of the general causes of the obesity and weight problem in the United States, and we also observe it in other societies. Do you have a sense of, I've read this, what purports to be a rule of thumb, that when you're talking about weight loss, that it's overwhelmingly, some say 75, 80, 85, 90% calories in, and only 10, 15, 20% exercise or calorie expenditure. Do you have a thought on that ratio?
Yeah, I think it's pretty hard to put a number on it. I think physical activity is important. However, the key thing to remember is that you can always out-eat your physical activity. So no matter how much, almost regardless of how much you're exercising, you can always out eat it. So the question is, how much are you eating relative to how much you're expending? And I think that's really the critical thing. And for me, that does put the focus more on food intake in terms of determining body fatness.
I'd like to dig in a little bit to diet more specifically, and then maybe we can talk about specific issues like fat, carbs, sugar, salt, etc. When you sort of look at the average Western diet, what's your assessment of it? I mean, that the food pyramid that's in your mind as the ideal pyramid, and maybe it's not a pyramid shape at all, which I think might be kind of interesting. What does that look like?
Yeah, so first of all, the average Western diet, or at least the average American diet, is truly atrocious. So in 2010, and honestly, it really even shocks me to see this data as much as I've read about what we're eating. In 2010, the USDA Dietary Advisory Committee released a report showing what the top sources of calories are in the US diet. And the number one source of calories in the US diet, I kid you not, is a category called grain-based desserts. And this is cake, cookies, donuts, pastries, that sort of thing. That is the number one source of calories in the US diet. And in the top 6 are bread, chicken, pizza, soda, and alcohol. That's the top 6 right there. So, I mean, the US diet on average is really, really, really bad. And I think there are a lot of things that are wrong with it. And if I were to propose a healthier diet, it would be one that's based primarily on whole, unrefined foods that have a lower calorie density, that is fewer calories per volume. So, for example, crackers have a very high calorie density because there's no water in them, as opposed to oatmeal, which has a lower calorie density. So foods that have a lower calorie density, that are simple, natural, unrefined foods, things that are more similar to what our ancestors would have eaten, and things that don't things that don't seduce us to overeat them, like, what is it, Pringles that say, bet you can't eat just one. I mean, these are foods that are literally designed to motivate us to purchase them and eat them. And those are the types of food that drive us to eat too much. So if we can have a diverse, unrefined, omnivorous diet, I think that we would be much better off than we are currently.
Over time, we've seen the focus of the food industry, the diet industry, et cetera, often trend towards a particular aspect of nutrition. And there was a period some decades ago where the focus was fat. You should cut out fat and replace it with other stuff. And a lot of times what it was being replaced with was, as you're talking about, calorie dense but relatively unnutritious foods. The low carb diets of the sort of Atkins diet fame, although there's no shortage of other ones that focus on not eating carbohydrates. The focus on sugar as a sort of component to be avoided. What's your sense of this? Are there any of these that make particular sense to you, or any that acutely don't make sense?
I mean, I think they all make some degree of sense. I think that none of them would be as popular as they are, or at least were, without some grain of truth. However, I think all of them are one component of the bigger picture, which is that all of those things, fat and sugar and carbohydrate, are things that contribute to overeating and fat gain, and cutting them out helps people slim down. And that's not to say that all diets are equally effective. It is true that low carbohydrate diets tend to help people lose weight more effectively than at least your standard moderate low fat diet. So, however, I mean, those diets all will help you lose weight. But I think what is kind of disturbing to me is to see people focus exclusively on one factor and then ignore everything else. And I think the sugar mania that has gripped this country over the last, I don't know, few months or maybe even years is an example of that. I think that, I mean, I don't think sugar is good for you. I don't eat any refined sugar, or very, very, very little. I eat plenty of fruit. I eat lots of fruit. I eat very little refined sugar. I don't think it's good for you, or at least not for most people. But I also don't think that it's the cause of all of our ills, and I don't even think it's the main cause of all of our ills. I mean, if I could choose between a lifestyle where my calories were in check and I was physically active, but I was eating a fair amount of sugar, and a lifestyle where I was not active and eating too many calories and eating no sugar, I would definitely choose the first one over the second one. I mean, there's a priority list for health, and sugar is on there somewhere, but it's not number one.
As far as some of the different buzzwords that are thrown around, then sugar-free is one of them, and we've spoken extensively with experts about how that, as a marketing tool, can actually be incredibly deceptive. Loaded with antioxidants, potentially has anti-inflammatory properties, etc. Number one, how accurately can we assess some of those claims? And number two, is that even really what one should be paying attention to in terms of the composition of their diet?
No, I don't think so. And first of all, I think the majority of those claims, frankly, are just baloney. Those foods that make claims like that are generally not going to deliver you any benefit whatsoever, and particularly when compared to whole, unrefined foods. And the fact is that a lot of those foods that make claims like that are the very foods that are the most refined, that are probably contributing to the problem more than anything. So,
what would be an example of that?
Sunny Delight with vitamin C in it. I mean, these are Tang with vitamin C. You know, putting vitamin C in there is a cheap trick, basically, to try to get people to think it's healthy. And instead, it's just sugar water. It's colored sugar water. So, and there are many, many foods like this. So I think that it's very easy to be tricked by this. I mean, even I am sometimes. Like, I don't eat bread very often, but I bought a loaf of bread the other day, and I saw the bread. It looked dark. It said multi-grain on it. And it wasn't until I brought it home that I realized it wasn't actually whole grain. It was multi-grain, which means it has different types of refined grains in it, but it wasn't a whole grain food. So I had, even myself, who I'm tend to be extremely aware of this sort of thing, even I am able to be tricked sometimes. So I think you really have to stick with simple heuristics, like choosing the most unrefined foods that you can possibly choose, and not even look at those processed foods and decide between them on the basis of whatever, health or nutrient claims they have on the package.
Is bread a good example of where you can make more informed decisions, in the sense that at my local grocery store, for example, you have one area of breads, which are kind of like the more local bakeries. And when you look at the ingredient list, it's like 4 to 6 ingredients. And I sort of recognize everything that's on that list. I can also go down to the packaged bread aisle. Those breads have anywhere from 15 to 25 ingredients, many of which I don't recognize. Are there significant differences in terms of the health impact of choosing a 4-ingredient bread, and you can sort of imagine what those ingredients are, versus one of the factory breads?
I don't know. Maybe. I tend to think probably how refined the flour is a larger factor. So,
Interesting.
I hate to be the pessimist, but that local bread that's made with white flour is probably not so good for you. I mean, white flour is inherently not a food that is supportive of health. So, yeah, I mean, I personally, just based on the precautionary principle, I would probably tend to favor something that's simpler, like the local bread, and certainly it would taste better. But do those extra ingredients make any difference for health? Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure.
Last thing I want to touch on, we have a lot of vegetarians, pescatarians. We've got a vegan working on the show. There's a lot of these different preference choices that people are making with regard to animal product consumption, not from a moral or ethical standpoint or one of animal cruelty, et cetera, but from a health impact. Where do you fall on what share of one's diet it makes sense to have animal products be? And feel free to distinguish between sort of dairy and meat if that's relevant.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely compelling reasons to be vegetarian and vegan, and I have a lot of respect for people who choose that lifestyle. However, humans have been eating animal foods for, probably at least 100 million years, maybe more than that. Our ancestors is what I mean. We evolved from insectivores originally, mammalian insectivores, and then after that we became primates about 60 million years ago, and our animal food intake probably went down quite a bit, but almost all primates eat insects, so we probably were never completely vegetarian or vegan, with some exceptions like gorillas. But chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, they eat a little bit of meat, they eat insects regularly. And if you look at human evolution, it's really, since the evolution of our genus, Homo, 2.6 million years ago, it's really a progression toward higher calorie density of the foods. And part of that was eating more animal foods. So our ancestors have been eating, I don't want to say high levels necessarily, but variable levels, some of which were high, for millions of years. And the human body really humans truly are obligate omnivores. We cannot survive literally without some amount of animal foods because we have an absolute dietary requirement for vitamin B12, which is only found in animal foods. So there's no doubt that our physiology requires animal foods. Today we can supplement with B12, and I think we can do fine, at least some people, but I think that it's more than just about the B12. I think that human physiology has been receiving animal foods for so long that we are adapted to those things. And I think there's much less of a difference between being an omnivore and being a vegetarian in terms of nutrition and physiology than there is between being a vegetarian and a vegan, because when you're eating a vegan diet, you're not eating any animal foods, and so there's a whole swath of nutrients that you're either not getting or you're gonna have a harder time getting. Some of those are essential nutrients like B12. Some of them are non-essential nutrients like creatine, something that enhances physical performance. And there are probably other things that we don't even know about yet that the human body is just accustomed to because it's been receiving those things for millions and millions of years. So, and then that brings us to the question of how much we should be eating. And I don't really have a definitive answer for that, but I would say that the healthiest, if we go looking for the healthiest cultures we can find that are not hunter-gatherers, people who are living a little bit more like we're living in the modern world today, you tend to find the healthiest people do not generally eat a lot of meat. So they're omnivores. I mean, every culture in the world is omnivorous unless they have some kind of religious restriction on meat. Every culture in the world eats meat and some sort of animal food. But I think that the quantities that you see in the cultures that have longer lifespans and better chronic disease rates tend to be lower. And so, myself personally, not as much for health reasons, more for environmental reasons, I tend to eat less meat than most people, but I do eat some meat.
Absolutely fascinating. Very, very informative. We've been speaking with Dr. Stephan Guyenet, who's an obesity researcher and health writer. I encourage you to check out his website, wholehealthsouce.org. So great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
As you may know, we've not seen President Donald Trump's tax returns. We've talked about this before. There are a number of reasons that we want to see them, and a number of reasons Trump may not want the American public to see the tax returns. This could include revelations about whether or not he has actually turned over his businesses to his family, whether he pays taxes or hardly pays taxes, whether his own tax plan would significantly help his own bottom line, whether he's as rich as he says he is, whether he's as charitable as he says he is. And it could also reveal questionable, it's kind of charitable to even call it questionable, but it could reveal questionable business ties to Russia or maybe other countries. And at this point, much like the Russia investigation, if there were nothing to worry about, Trump should be doing what he could do to make the issue go away. If there's really nothing to worry about with regard to the Russia stuff, you wouldn't see Trump asking the FBI to knock it off with the Russia stuff. If there was really nothing to worry about in terms of what's in his tax returns, at this point, given that nearly 3 out of 4 Americans want to see the tax returns, you would just see Trump maybe releasing the tax returns. The fact that he is not continues to tell us a lot about what might be in there. And a couple of weeks ago, I told you how U.S. Congressman Bill Pascrell, a Democrat from New Jersey, proposed to the rest of the House Ways and Means Committee that they use a law from 1924 to request Donald Trump's tax returns from the Treasury. And the other day, Bill Pascrell told NorthJersey.com, quote, "The American people have the right to know whether or not their president is operating under conflicts of interest related to international affairs, tax reform, governmental contracts, or otherwise." I told you last week that the Republican-controlled Ways and Means Committee and its chairman, Republican Kevin Brady, rejected the proposal, saying, no, that'll violate Donald Trump's privacy. Bill Pascrell didn't give up. He was able to bring an appeal of the decision to a vote among the entire House to potentially overturn the decision with a resolution that we are showing our television audience here. But earlier this week, just a couple days ago, when they took the roll call, 229 House Republicans voted to keep Donald Trump's tax returns secret. We have the results for you. Out of everyone who voted, every single House Republican voted to sustain Brady's decision to conceal the tax returns. Every Democrat voted to reverse the decision and release the tax returns. Now, to be super clear, this wouldn't have made the actual tax returns public. This would have released the tax returns to the Ways and Means Committee, would have given them 10 years of Donald Trump's taxes behind closed doors. Then the committee would have been able to vote on, once they reviewed that information, once they got Donald Trump's tax returns, they could have decided whether to make the information available to the rest of the House, which effectively would have made the tax returns public. Democratic representative from California, Barbara Lee, tweeted just a couple of days ago, quote, "House Republicans just voted to conceal Trump's tax returns and conflicts of interest from the American people. This is despicable. This is obviously despite the fact that Trump is the only president, actually, probably the only major party candidate in modern history not to release his tax returns. This is usually sort of trivial, Pat, for presidential candidates. You just do it. 3 out of 4 Americans think the tax returns should be released, regardless of what Trump and Kellyanne Conway have told us. This is actually increasingly a signal to me that there's obviously very damaging information in those tax returns.
And Congressman Brady said that he wasn't going to recommend this because it would violate Donald Trump's privacy. But when you're president of the United States, you really have to give up a lot of privacy because you're a public servant, and not just any public servant, but you represent so much of what America is and the will of all of the people. And that's kind of why the Secret Service doesn't just allow you to go anywhere. And you have to face all these different restrictions, and this should be one of them.
Donald Trump let the American people into some of those discussions at Mar-a-Lago about the North Korean missile launch, deciding to hold those discussions, as well as with the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, in front of people just hanging out on the patio. So in that way, Donald Trump has given up his privacy, hasn't he? Why did Republicans do this? Probably for a number of reasons. Number one, they might be afraid of what they'll find in the tax returns, and then they'll be pressured to actually take action against Trump as a result of it. Or those Republicans are running for re-election next year, and they don't want to alienate Trump supporters or Donald Trump himself. And they also probably want Donald Trump to sign the bills that they put forward. What's the future of this? I don't know. Yesterday, the House Judiciary Committee voted on a resolution to demand the Justice Department give them documents that would maybe shed some light on Trump's conflicts of interest and ties with Russia. The committee voted that down as well. I don't know that we're ever going to see those tax returns.
Yeah, probably not. There's a long ways to go because this vote was completely on party lines, and you need to sway 45 Republicans over. And then even then, you have to get a recommendation from the Treasury Department. Steve Mnuchin is, of course, the Donald Trump appointee.
Yep.
You have to get the Ways and Means Committee, which is controlled by Republicans, to release it to the rest of Congress. I mean, there's a lot of steps there.
Maybe the hacking possibility is the most likely to actually reveal Trump's tax returns.
Yeah, I mean, hacking a president, I'm sure that's obviously illegal.
Yes.
But, it's out of the interest of the American public.
Your suspicion is right. It may be illegal to hack the tax returns of a president. Hey, by we, I mean Pat and I took the Political Compass sort of test, I guess we would call it, politicalcompass.org. This is not a perfect test of one's political alignment, but it is interesting. And it puts you on a matrix sort of from left to right and from authoritarian to libertarian. And I actually took this test on the show in 2012. So in a second, we'll compare whether my politics have changed over the last 5 years. Let's first take a look at a few things, starting with the 2016 primaries, okay? As you can see, in the primaries, you had the Republican candidates basically fully on the right-wing authoritarian side. You had Hillary Clinton still in the right-wing authoritarian quadrant. And then you had Bernie Sanders sort of on the left, right between authoritarian and libertarian. In the general election, you then saw a combination of Donald Trump, fully authoritarian and quite right, according to the Political Compass test. Hillary Clinton, less authoritarian than Donald Trump, but still relatively conservative politically. You had Gary Johnson, who was also on the right politically, but much more libertarian than authoritarian. And then you had Jill Stein over on the left libertarian quadrant of the graph. Historical figures that we can show you and how they would have placed on this graph. We're showing Joseph Stalin would have been a left authoritarian. Hitler would have been extremely authoritarian, more right than left. Margaret Thatcher, less authoritarian than Hitler, but more right. And then we have, I'm guessing is that Milton Friedman, presumably, as a historical figure, who would have been very right, but more libertarian. And then Gandhi would have been a left libertarian. Okay, so how did I do? Let's start with that. First, what I want to show you is, this is my result when I took this in 2012. And as you can see, grainy old picture from the old David Pakman Show episodes before we were in high definition, you see that I was a left libertarian. And now let's compare to my new results. I have changed my politics slightly, and I've become slightly more left and slightly more libertarian over the last 5 years. Pat also took this test. Here's Pat's result. And as you can see, Pat, slightly more authoritarian than me, slightly more right than me. That is interesting. How about that? This isn't a perfect test, right? But it does assess some pretty important aspects of someone's overall worldview. And it is interesting that over 5 years, I mean, these are slight differences, but basically my politics have not changed over the 5 years.
Right, and there's also 4 options there. There's agree, strongly disagree, and disagree.
Right.
So we could agree or disagree on a lot of the same things there, but depending on how strongly we do so, that could kind of skew the results a little bit.
There's a Reddit thread with lots of our viewers taking the politicalcompass.org test and then posting their results. And a lot of our viewers are pretty widely all over the map. I encourage people to check that out at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Take it yourself and also post it. It's pretty interesting to see the range of views in our audience.
Yeah, I'd love to do another one too, because I mean, there's some questions here that you don't really associate too much with politics. Like, for example, when you're upset about something, is it best to pay attention to that or to get your mind off it and think of different things? Is that really political?
It's not obviously political in terms of social or economic issues per se, but that question, I agree, can tell us a lot about the way we approach issues that are related to politics and culture and society. So I understand the inclusion of questions like that.
Right. I mean, the definition of political science is as vague as the study of human decisions. So
yes,
that's an umbrella term right there.
Politicalcompass.org. Take it. So I guess the big news is I am not an authoritarian leftist. I am a libertarian leftist, or certainly much more libertarian than authoritarian. We have a voicemail. The voicemail is very, very interesting, and it is about someone who appears to be quite taken with producer Pat. Our voicemail number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Let's take a listen to what this caller had to say.
Hi, David. Hi, Patrick. Oh, God. Please don't shut the show down because of me, because I made these very erotic and seductive phone calls to you, David, especially to you, Patrick. Please, I apologize. Don't shut the show down because of me. Please, I'm sorry. I'm a big fan of both of you, especially you, beautiful Patrick.
Yeah. Quite an admirer, Pat, that you have here.
How am I supposed to feel about this?
I think you should feel fine. I mean, the show's not going to get shut down because your appearance is so distracting to some viewers that they can't help but leave us erotic voicemails or whatever it is the caller's suggesting.
It seems like this person was more enamored with you over the years, and maybe now they're swaying in my direction.
Oh, the attention is completely off of me at this point with this viewer.
Are you relieved?
It's not a question of relief or jealousy, but it is, I'm merely observing what it is that's taking place, and it is endlessly fascinating, that's for sure. On the bonus show today, Alabama, a particular Alabama church wants to create its own police force. We'll talk about that. The average distance from any point in the U.S. to the closest forest has increased significantly since 1990. Why? We will explore that. And a man who engaged in sexual hate crimes involving a disabled teen will serve zero jail time. All of those stories and more on the bonus show. davidpakman.com/membership to sign up. The coupon code is available. It's IVoted17.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.